Now we're going to pre-assemble all the pieces of the shaper hood and fence system right here on the bench before we install it on the machine. Let's go ahead and grab the hood. Okay, now that we've got all those components installed, you'll actually adjust those when you get ready to do your workpiece. But that's all pre-assembled, and that can simply bolt on the machine when we're ready to use the shaper now. Now on the back side of the machine, you're going to notice that it is a 3-speed shaper. That means there's 3 separate pulleys, so you can keep the RPM within the right range of the tooling. And there's a screw that is in the top and bottom of the door. It'll open up. You're going to notice that there's a small switch right here. This is a safety switch so that the machine does not start when the back door is open. And you simply will loosen up, use the handle to position the belt. Once the belt is in place on the correct pulley, that'll set the RPM of the machine. You can set the tension back on the belt, tighten it down, and you're ready to go. And again, from this vantage point, you can see the lift mechanism, and it runs an Acme threaded screw through a bronze bushing right there. And you'll see that it raises and lowers the machine quite easily. Very smooth, very stable, and accurate. The shaper has its own separate 3-horsepower motor. They share the same cast iron tabletop, they share a cabinet, but they have separate motors so that they're able to be operated with full horsepower. Now to use the shaper, we simply crank the handle on the back. That'll begin to raise the shaper spindle up, and I can pop out 1 or 2 or as many rings as I need to accommodate my shaper tooling. And then the next thing I'll do is I'll grab the shaper hood and bring it over to the machine. And that simply lifts in place. There are 2 lock handles, and these will screw right down to the cast iron. Simply line that up, line this one up, it'll drop in a hole, and this will secure the fence assembly and get us ready for shaper use. Now a shaper is a powerful tool and you can remove a lot of material. That's one of the reasons that the hood assembly on this is so heavy duty. It's all cast iron. The other thing that you'll notice is that the fence assembly itself can be slid forward or back to position itself even with the edge of the cutter head or a little bit behind. You can simply slide it back, lock it down in position, and that'll set your base adjustment. The outfeed fence, as you're typically going to feed this direction here, is adjustable, and you'll see that it has a knob right here that allows you to bring it forward or back. So as you feed stock through here and you remove material, this fence may want to be a little bit further out to accommodate the new face of the material. I'm going to raise the spindle up, and that's done with the handle on the side of the machine, and once you have that to the position that you'll be using it at, there's a lock handle that allows you to lock the spindle in position. And you can have a view of the spindle right here. I'm going to lock it in position with the lock handle. There's a nut that's on the top, and this will expose the spindle. Now you'll see that there's a number of spacers right here on the shaper spindle. This is a 3/4 inch spindle, and you'll have these spacers on top. You'll simply slide your tooling over the spindle and have it adjusted for the appropriate height, and you can put 1, 2, 3, or as many of the spindle spacers as you need on the spindle to set your tooling to the appropriate height. Once you're done, you'll simply put the nut back up on top and lock it down. There's a wrench that'll fit on the top and one right here. And that'll set your tooling to the appropriate height and allow you to even stack multiple cutter heads. You'll have some cutter heads that might be thinner or thicker than others, and you can actually stack those and simply drop a spacer in between and then drop another cutter head on. Now when you're feeding stock through against the faces of the fence, you'll want to have this assembly down. This is part of the hold down and hold back assembly. The red portion right here can be slid and adjusted to where it holds your material down to the table so it doesn't want to lift up. And this portion right here is a guard so that you can't get your hands into the cutter head as it's spinning around. It can also be used with a little bit of spring pressure to hold material back to the fence as well. Now many people like to use a power feeder to help out, and you can mount a power feeder onto the machine. You'll have to drill some holes in the cast iron, and you can actually use the power feeder to push the stock through the shaper fence. One of the things about using a shaper on a combination machine is the number of methods that you have to push your stock through. You can put your stock up against the fence and send it through the shaper in this direction, but you can also use the sliding table to do end cuts on your product. You'll bring it through this way and do a cross cut. For example, if you're doing a cabinet door, it allows you to cut the end or a tin end quite easily with the sliding table. One of the big things that people are concerned about in using a combination machine is changeover times. Because you have to switch from one function to the other, it does take a little bit of time, but it really goes pretty quick, and you really have about a 30-second changeover time from one function to the other. Let's switch from shaper mode to the saw mode. And that's simply done by unlocking and loosening the shaper hood with these two bolts. And once these are loosened, we'll simply lift this shaper hood away and out of our way. Lower the shaper assembly itself. And then raise the saw blade. And lock it down. Now we've gone from saw to shaper in about 30 seconds or so, and that's really the changeover time to go between those two functions. On the other side of the machine here we have the joiner planer, and the changeover time is just about as quick. This machine has a 10-inch jointer and a 10-inch planer. This is the fence assembly for the joiner, and you'll notice on the bottom side here, this is the bracket and this is the rail that slides back and forth. You're going to notice that this has a dovetail way on it. And this allows the fence assembly to self-square when you tighten down the lock nut. This will slide, actually the fence will slide back and forth in this bracket, and when you tighten it down, the dovetail pushes down against the other dovetail and it'll self-square. To install it on the machine is real easy. This simply stands up. There's two bolts right here, and those go in with a little Allen wrench. And if you're not ripping wide pieces, you can actually leave this bracket on and just simply fold the fence back out of the way in order to use it. Line up the holes. And I like to install them just loose for a second, and then I'll snug them down. Now that your bracket is secured, you can see that the fence glides back and forth quite nicely in there. And when it locks down, it's a nice secure fence assembly. Now that the fence bracket is securely fastened down, you can make sure that the lock knob is again tightened down. That'll push the dovetails against each other and square the fence. You can also tilt the fence for doing a mitered edge here. Let's go ahead and loosen the handles. There's a nice heavy cast iron bracket here, and the fence will simply lay down on its edge like that. The handles can again lock, and you can slide your stock over the machine in this direction here to get a chamfered edge. This little nut right here is your 90-degree adjustment to make sure that your fence is exactly 90 degrees to the table. When you're doing face joining, you want to make sure that you adjust the guard to where it comes down, and in this case here, this will lock the guard down, and I'll adjust it down to where it's just above the board, so that as I slide my board over it, it's covering the cutter head. And as I slide it across the joiner, if I were to get my hands down here, you'll notice that this is spring-loaded and it pushes down and it keeps my hands away from the cutter head. When I'm edge joining, I typically will lower that guard a little bit further, and I'll do that with the coarse adjustment knob. I'll drop that down. The other thing I'll do is I'll open up a gap on this side that's the width of my board. It'll allow me to bring my stock right up against the fence and right across here. And again, I can position this, if I'd like to, very, very close to the edge of the board and expose no cutter head at all, so that as I'm jointing, I'm not worried about it swinging out of the way. It allows me to joint this effortlessly. Now, we mentioned that this is a joiner and a planer. Of course, it's a 10-inch joiner and a 10-inch planer. In order to switch from one to the other, we'll simply fold the guard back out of the way. The fence will retract by loosening the knobs. Loosening the slide here for the dovetail. This will slide back. Slide it back. Up and over it. And this will stay on the machine. We'll simply reach around and unlock the forward pin for the front table. This will pivot up and out of the way. And I'll unlock the back side. With the machine in this position here, you can see the cutter head, you can see the infeed and outfeed rollers and the anti-kickback dogs. Now, to complete the changeover, the dust chute simply folds up and over, and I simply will remove my dust hose and connect it on this side here, and I'm ready to start planing. Now, to use the planer, we're going to raise the planer bed up, and that's done with this handle here. Simply make sure that the knob is unlocked. That unlocks the shaft. Our counter is going to be to the side, and I'll simply raise this up by cranking the handle. It's a very quick action. Once I have it set to my desired thickness, I'll simply lock this handle. That'll lock the center shaft, and if you look inside, you'll see a nice heavy steel post on the inside. And to flip from one mode to the other ones, you just have to crank it down just a little bit below 5 inches. You don't have to drop it all the way to the bottom. Once that's dropped down, we'll flip the dust hood up and over. On the back side here of the dust hood, you'll notice that there's a spring catch, and that prevents this from coming up and out of the way. We simply reach down, loosen that, and flip the dust hood up and over. And you might hear that little click. That little click actually lets you know that the safety switch is on. And with the hood open and with the tables open, the machine will not start in this position. Now this machine uses a separate motor. We talked about a separate motor for the saw and for the shaper. Well, the joiner planer also uses a separate motor because you want full horsepower as you're joining and planing. Now this is a 3-knife cutter head, so you get a really nice finish on your wood. And in order to set the knives, it comes with a nice small wrench that comes in here and loosens the nuts. And it also happens to have a nice jig here to go back and set your knives. This simply goes up against the actual cutter head itself and allows you to gauge the knife and then to tighten those down, all with a nice simple jig. Now as you're looking in here, you're going to see a few things. You're going to see a nice serrated in-feed roller on the machine. You'll see a sandblasted out-feed roller, and that provides adequate pressure to hold your lumber down to the table and to feed it through the machine adequately. The other thing that you'll notice in this position here is you're going to see cast iron, and plenty of it. You're going to see it right here from the brackets where the bearing housing is for the cutter head and for the in-feed and out-feed rollers, and it goes all the way out here through the hinges and all the way up through the tables. The tables have heavy webbing that secure the table and make those durable and flat and stable for the entire lifetime of the machine. Now while we have the cutter head open here, let's have a look at these cast iron safety fingers. These are part of the table, and you'll see that there's little fingers here, and they come up very, very close to where the cutter head is. The purpose of these is twofold. It helps in dust collection, but that's kind of a secondary function. The primary function is to reduce the noise signature of the machine, and this really will break up the shock wave as the blade is turning near this area here and really reduce the sound of the machine so you don't have that knife passing a full edge here. It'll be a serrated edge. Makes the machine run a little bit quieter, improves your dust collection, and it's a really nice feature on this machine. From this angle here, you'll notice just how heavy the hinges are. Again, solid cast iron into a solid cast iron table and a solid cast iron body. Solid steel pins for the hinge movement makes the table lift up and over real easy. It's very smooth, it's stable, it's accurate. This is also the adjustment for your in-feed table. There's independent adjustment for the in-feed and out-feed table. It simply is done through this knob. The table raises and lowers, and your gauge is right here to tell you how much material you're taking off with each cut. That's simply raised and lowered there, and then you lock the table down here on the far side. Now working with the knives on this machine is very easy. There's a number of safeties that are built into the machine, and we'll see some of them right here on the side. If you look at the cast iron housing, and just beneath the flange right here, you're going to see a little spring. And what this is, there's a safety switch down inside the machine, and this rod comes up and it actually contacts the hinge. So when this table is folded up and out of the way, it activates that switch, which shuts off the cutter head, and I won't be able to start this when the tables are open. Now in order to use this system effectively, it dictates that we have to open the tables in a particular order. And you'll see that it has this little finger right here, and this means that you have to close this table first before you close the outfeed table. And this one will come up and over the top of the other.